the silence dark, whispers in the midnight park. The night is cold, there's no escape. Ghostly figures take their shape.
Hey horror fans, welcome to Real Talk Horror Edition. I'm your host, Josh Bell, and I'm thrilled you've decided to join me today as we dive deep into the shadowy corners of cinema where fear and artistry collide. If you're a fan of movies that push boundaries, make you squirm in your seat, and stay with you after you leave the theater, you're in the right place. This new series is all about one filmmaker who's made it his mission to shake up the horror genre in ways that are as unforgettable as they are polarizing. Rob Zombie. Whether you know him as the front man of White Zombie or the mind behind some of the most unsettling horror films of the last 2 decades, Rob Zombie is a name that demands attention. For those who might not be familiar with him, Zombie started his career as a heavy metal musician, bringing a macabre theatrical edge to his music. But in 2003, the movie came out in 2003, he stepped behind the camera with House of a Thousand Corpses, and horror has never quite been the same. His style is unmistakable, Groundhouse-inspired, unapologetically gritty, and full of nods to the sleaziest and most shocking parts of 70s exploitation cinema. His work is not for everyone. It's raw, chaotic, and morally challenging. But whether you love it or loathe it, you can't ignore it. And that's what makes him such a fascinating filmmaker. His movies stir up strong reactions. They make us question our own boundaries for what's acceptable in storytelling, and at times even force us to empathize with characters who, on paper, are utterly repulsive. And that's exactly why I wanted to create this series. Each episode, we're taking one of Zombie's films and dissecting it, piece by bloody piece. We'll look at the themes that define his work, the visual and narrative choices that make his style distinct, and the moments that make his films unforgettable. I'll share my personal impressions, what worked for me, what didn't, and of course, I'll give you my final recommendation. But I also want to look at the bigger picture. What sets Rob Zombie's film apart from other horror directors? How does he walk the tightrope between paying homage to classic horror and creating something uniquely his own? And perhaps most importantly, what is it about his work that makes people so divided? Today, we're tackling The Devil's Rejects, a film that not only solidified Zombie's place in the horror world, but also showcased his growth as a filmmaker. This is a movie that's equal parts brutal and bizarre and forces us to question where the line is between anti-hero and outright villain. It's not for the faint of heart, but it is one of his most celebrated works for good reason. So buckle up, horror fans, because we're about to hit the road with the Firefly family, and trust me, this is one hell of a ride. Let's go ahead and get started. So let's talk about The Devil's Rejects, the 2005 follow-up to his directorial debut, House of a Thousand Corpses. Now, if you've seen House of a Thousand Corpses, you might go into this expecting more of the same, over-the-top, psychedelic carnival of horrors. But no, Zombie flipped the script with this one. This is the second film in what would become the Firefly trilogy, and it again stars Sid Haig as the twisted yet oddly charismatic Captain Spaulding, Sherry Moon Zombie as the psychotically playful baby Firefly, and Bill Moseley as Otis Driftwood, who is, well, Otis is just terrifying. Together, these three make up the Firefly family, a group of sadistic murderers who seem to revel in chaos and destruction. The Devil's Rejects picks up right where House of a Thousand Corpses leaves off. The Firefly family is under siege by law enforcement, and the movie wastes no time throwing us into that action. The opening sequence alone is a blood-soaked nightmare as the Fireflies fight their way out of their home and hit the road. What follows is a chaotic and brutal road movie that's as much about survival as it is about forcing us in the audience to confront our own boundaries. A fascinating thing about this movie is the way it plays with morality. The Fireflies are, without question, villains. They're sadistic killers. And yet, as we follow them on the run from Sheriff Wydell, played by a delightfully unhinged William Forsythe, there are moments where we almost feel sorry for them. Zombie forces us into the uncomfortable position of empathizing, even if just for a moment, with these monsters. It's a testament to the film's complexity and, honestly, its audacity. And let's talk about the shift in tone. House of a Thousand Corpses was a neon fever dream. It was surreal, chaotic, and at times cartoonish. But with The Devil's Rejects, Zombie took a much grittier, more grounded approach. It's clear he drew inspiration from 70s films like Texas Chainsaw Massacre with its raw, gritty aesthetic, but also like Bonnie and Clyde, which brought a certain outlaw romanticism to its anti-heroes. Zombie here was determined to make something raw and unrelenting, and he absolutely succeeded. Everything about this movie feels dirty, and in the best way possible. The cinematography leans into natural lighting and muted colors, and gives it a sort of documentary feel. It's like you're watching something you're not supposed to see. And it's that voyeuristic quality that makes the film as unsettling as it is. But of course, not everyone was a fan. The film was polarizing when it was released. Some praised Zombie for stepping up his game as a filmmaker and creating something that felt fresh and visceral. Others thought it was just too violent, too excessive, and well, just too much. And that's fair. The movie does not pull its punches, but among horror fans, it found its audience and has since achieved a kind of cult status. One of the things that really sets The Devil's Rejects apart, again, is his soundtrack. Zombie doesn't just use music to set the mood, he uses it to create a strange dissonance that makes the violence hit even harder. Tracks like Freebird by Lynyrd Skynyrd and Midnight Rider by the Allman Brothers Band give certain scenes this haunting poetic quality, like a twisted love letter to that Americana again. All in all, The Devil's Rejects is a film that takes risks. It's not afraid to make you uncomfortable, to challenge your sense of right and wrong, and to leave you feeling a little grimy by the time the credits roll. Whether you see it as a masterpiece or a little too much, there's no denying that this is a pivotal moment in Zombie's career. And here's the thing, this is only the beginning of Zombie finding his voice as a filmmaker. With The Devil's Rejects, he proved that he wasn't just about shock value. He was about storytelling, atmosphere, and pushing the limits of what horror can be. And that's a big reason why the film continues to have meaning with fans almost 20 years later. So are you ready to dive deeper into this bloody, chaotic, morally ambiguous ride? Let's get into the heart of what makes Devil's Rejects one of, if not the most celebrated of Rob Zombie's films. One of the things that makes Devil's Rejects so unforgettable is how Zombie tackles the theme of family. Now, we have to be real, the Firefly family is a collection of brutal murderers and sadistic torturers. They do horrific things without a shred of remorse. And yet, somehow, Zombie finds ways to humanize them, just enough to make us squirm in our seats. Throughout the film, there are these moments of loyalty, tenderness, and even love between the Fireflies. Now, it's not the kind of love most of us would recognize, but it's there. Whether it's Baby teasing Otis like a little sister, or Captain Spaulding's fierce protectiveness, these dynamics challenge us. Zombie forces us to confront this unsettling idea that even monsters can have a soft side. This moral ambiguity is a hallmark of his work. He doesn't let us off the hook with black and white morality. He drags us right into the gray, daring us to feel just a flicker of empathy for the people we know are totally irredeemable. Visually, Zombie style is just as impactful. The gritty realism is a sharp departure from the surreal and cartoonish aesthetic of House of a Thousand Corpses. In Devil's Rejects, everything feels raw, dirty, and painfully real. The saturated color palette creates an oppressive atmosphere, hot, dusty, suffocating, like the very air is drenched in blood and sweat. And then there's the editing. It's chaotic, but intentional, with abrupt cuts and jarring transitions that keep you on edge. Zombie doesn't want you to feel comfortable, and trust me, you won't. Every frame feels like it's teetering on the edge of complete madness. But what really ties it all together is the setting. Zombie leans heavily into the idea of Americana decay. The film's desolate highways, dingy motels, run-down back roads are more than just a backdrop. They're a metaphor. This isn't the shiny, hopeful America of Norman Rockwell paintings. This is an America that's rotted from the inside out. The idyllic dream is long dead, and what's left is a world where the Firefly family thrives. A world of chaos, corruption, and moral collapse. In The Devil's Rejects, every detail from the characters to the visuals works together to create something that is deeply unsettling but impossible to look away from. Zombie's style doesn't just show us horror, he makes us feel it in our bones. So let's talk about the powerhouse performances in The Devil's Rejects, because one of this film's greatest strengths is its cast. Each actor brings their characters to life with an intensity that's hard to shake. First up, we have Bill Moseley as Otis Driftwood, and Otis is terrifying, plain and simple. Moseley plays him with a kind of unhinged brilliance. He's not just a killer, he's a predator. Every scene he's in is unpredictable because you never know when he's going to snap. There's this raw, animalistic energy to him. But what's really unnerving is how calm and calculated he can be when delivering his warped monologues. Moseley makes Otis a character you can't take your eyes off, even when you desperately want to look away. And then there's Sherry Moon Zombie as baby Firefly. Now, Sherry Moon has her detractors, but love her or hate her, she owns this role. Baby is a fascinating mix of charm and menace. One minute she's playful and flirtatious, luring people in with her laugh and girlish demeanor, and the next minute she's a ruthless killer. That ability to switch on a dime is what makes her so terrifying. And Sherry gives Baby this almost childlike glee in her cruelty, which is both unsettling and captivating. And of course, we have to talk about Captain Spaulding, Sid Haig. If Otis is raw and Baby is playful, Spaulding is pure, deranged charisma. Sid Haig had this incredible ability to be both terrifying and magnetic at the same time. Whether he's cracking crude jokes or threatening someone with a gun, Spaulding is the kind of character who commands every scene he's in. Haig's performance in this film cemented him as a horror icon, and rightfully so. But the Firefly family wouldn't be nearly as compelling without their nemesis, Sheriff Wydell, played by William Forsythe. Wydell starts out as the moral counterbalance to the Fireflies. He's a man seeking justice for the atrocities they've committed. But as the story unfolds, we watch him descend into his own darkness. Forsythe captures that transformation beautifully, taking Wydell from a righteous lawman to someone just as unhinged and brutal as the people he's chasing. His performance adds layers to the story, making it clear that in Zombie's world, no one is entirely innocent. The interplay between these characters is electric. Whether it's the twisted camaraderie of the Firefly family or the relentless cat and mouse game with Wydell, the actors bring a depth and intensity that makes this brutal world feel disturbingly real. This isn't just a story about villains and victims. It's a collision of broken, damaged people, all spiraling towards destruction. And it's the cast's commitment to these roles that make it all so truly compelling to watch. So let's dig into what The Devil's Rejects gets right and some places that it stumbles. First, the strengths. This film's atmosphere is next level. Rob Zombie doesn't just create a world, he drags you into it, kicking and screaming. From the sweltering heat of the sun-baked highways to the grimy interiors of rundown motels, every setting feels alive and oppressive. You can almost feel the dust on your skin and the blood in the air. It's visceral and immersive in a way that few horror films manage. Another standout strength is the film's brutality. Zombie doesn't flinch, ever. The violence isn't just there for shock value, though there's plenty of that. It is integral to the story, and it forces you to confront the Firefly family's depravity head on. But it also dares you to see the humanity buried within their monstrosity. It's a brutal balancing act, and Zombie pulls it off with this unrelenting confidence. And then there's the music. Zombie's choice of southern rock tracks is pure genius. Songs like the one I mentioned before, Leonard Skinner's Freebird, and Terry Reid's To Be Treated Right, are used in ways that are haunting and oddly beautiful. The juxtaposition of these soulful, nostalgic tracks against the film's horrific imagery creates a dissonance that will stick with you. It's not just a soundtrack, it becomes an emotional gut punch. But no film is perfect, and The Devil's Rejects is no exception. One of the more common criticisms is its pacing. The opening and closing acts are tight and intense. But the middle section, it lingers a little. Some scenes feel stretched out, almost indulgent. And while they add to the atmosphere, they can make the film drag for viewers who prefer that more streamlined narrative. Another weakness, depending on your perspective, is Zombie's love of shock value. Now, some would argue that this is part of his signature style. But there are moments where it feels like the violence and depravity overshadow the story. It's not that these elements don't belong. They do. But there are times when they threaten to overwhelm the narrative, making it harder to stay connected to the characters and their journey. Ultimately, though, the film's strengths far outweigh its weaknesses. Yes, it's brutal and unrelenting, and yes, it's flawed. But as we've seen in so many movies, it's those flaws that are part of what makes them so unforgettable, and Devil's Rejects is nothing different. It's messy, it's raw, and it doesn't play by the rules. Zombie takes big risks, and while not all of them land, the ones that do hit you like a freight train. This is a film that doesn't just want to scare you, it wants to haunt you, and it succeeds. So what's my take? Well, let me tell you, the first time I watched The Devil's Rejects, I was floored. This is not a film that plays it safe, not even a little. From the opening moments, it grabs you by the throat and doesn't let go. And what struck me immediately was that boldness. This is a movie that looks straight into the abyss of human depravity and says, yeah, we're going there. It forces you, as a viewer, to confront some of the darkest aspects of humanity, and does so unapologetically. But here's the thing, it's not just a mindless exercise in shock and gore. On that first watch, I was captivated by the way Rob Zombie constructs this brutal, oppressive world. But it wasn't until I revisited the film later that I really started to see the nuance in his storytelling. The horror is still front and center, of course, but there's also this strange, almost poetic quality to the way Zombie tells the story. Take the Firefly family, for example. Yeah, they're monsters. There's no denying that. But Zombie doesn't present them as one-dimensional villains. There's a weird, twisted humanity to them, a sense of loyalty and even love that makes them fascinating to watch. It's uncomfortable, but that discomfort is intentional. I think Zombie wants us to feel conflicted, and on rewatch, I found myself picking up on all these little moments that show just how carefully he walks that line. Then there's the film's visual and emotional tone, the grit, the grime, the sun-bleached decay of the setting. It all works together to create a world that feels completely lived in. And the music, I was blown away by how Zombie used those classic southern rock tracks. And then on rewatch, I realized just how perfectly they contrast with the violence on screen. It's haunting, really, the way that Freebird can feel both triumphant and tragic in the same breath. What really hit me in subsequent viewings, though, was how much this film stays with you. It's not just about the blood and guts, and there's plenty of that. It's about the way Zombie takes these grindhouse elements and elevates them into something that feels mythic. He's not just telling a story, he's painting a grim portrait of a world where morality has completely unraveled. Watching the film again, I found myself appreciating not just the rawness of it, but the artistry behind it. It's horrifying, but it's layered, emotional, and oddly beautiful in its own twisted way. It's the kind of film that will stick in your mind, it gnaws at you, and it makes you want to dive back in to uncover more. I think that's the magic of Zombie's work. It's never just one thing. And this film is a prime example of how he turns horror into something unforgettable. So who should watch The Devil's Rejects? Let me tell you right off the bat, this film, again, as we'll see on most of his movies, are not for everyone. If you are someone who, like me, loves grindhouse cinema with its grit, and you've got a soft spot for exploitation films that push boundaries and revel in chaos, this is an absolutely must-watch film. It's tailor-made for fans of horror that's raw, messy, and refuses to pull punches. If you're new to Rob Zombie's work, this film serves as a fantastic entry point. Sure, it's intense. Really intense. But it also encapsulates everything that defines Zombie's style. His love of the 1970s aesthetics, his knack for making you squirm, and his ability to create characters that are equal parts horrifying and hypnotic. But, and this is a big but, you need to be ready for what you're signing up for. Zombie doesn't do halfway. This is horror cranked up as far as it can go. For the uninitiated, here are a few viewing tips to help you get the most out of it. First and foremost, go in with an open mind. This isn't your average slasher flick or ghost story. It's more like a descent into the grimy underbelly of humanity, and it's going to make you uncomfortable. And that's the point. Second, know your limits. If you're not someone who enjoys extreme violence or morally ambiguous storytelling, you'll find this one a hard one to stomach. But if you're up for a challenge and can appreciate a film that's as much about provoking thought as it is about shocking you, well, you're in for something memorable. Lastly, pay attention to the details. Zombies films are packed with subtle nods to the past. From the music, to the cinematography, to the dialogue. Even in its most chaotic moments, there's a method to the madness. And noticing those little touches can deepen your appreciation for this film. Now for the big question. Is it worth watching? Absolutely. Like House of a Thousand Corpses before it, I give Devil's Rejects a solid 8 out of 10. This is probably the better film. I prefer to watch House of a Thousand Corpses, but this one is better made. This film is brutal, uncompromising, masterpiece of grindhouse horror. Yes, it has its flaws, but that's grindhouse. The pacing isn't perfect, and the shock value might feel overindulgent to some. But again, these imperfections are what make it raw and unique and fully grindhouse. So, at its heart, The Devil's Rejects is a film that demands your attention. It's not just about the blood and violence. It's about exploring the darker corners of the human psyche and forcing you to question where you draw the line between villain and anti-hero. It's intense, it's unrelenting, and it's unforgettable. If you have the stomach for it, this is a horror experience you don't want to miss. So grab your popcorn, maybe a stiff drink too, and buckle up. This is one wild ride you won't soon forget. All right, horror fans, now it's your turn to join the conversation. Have you seen The Devil's Rejects? What did you think of it? Did it leave you squirming in discomfort, cheering for the Firefly family against your better judgment, or just completely floored by the brutality of it all? Here's a question I'd love to hear your thoughts on. What do you think this film says about morality and horror? Does it blur the lines between right and wrong, or does it reinforce the idea that evil is irredeemable? Let me know. Hit me up on social media, drop your comments, or even send a message. I'd love to feature some of your thoughts and insights in a future episode. Now, let me give you a little teaser for what's coming up next. If you thought Devil's Rejects was intense, buckle up because we're going to dive into one of Zombie's most controversial projects, his reimagining of the horror classic Halloween. Love it or hate it, this one stirred up some strong opinions when it dropped, and I can't wait to unpack it with you. Before we wrap things up, I just want to say a huge thank you for joining me today on Real Talk Horror Edition. Whether you're a diehard fan of Zombie or just checking into his twisted filmography, I'm thrilled to have you along for the ride. If you enjoyed this episode, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. And if you're feeling generous, leave a review. Your support means the world to me and helps more horror fans discover the show. And remember, you can always follow me on social media for more horror and film discussion, sneak peeks, and maybe some behind the scenes from this fun podcast. The links are the links are not out there. We are on Instagram and Threads at Real Talk. You can email us, therealrealtalk@gmail.com. Let's keep the show going. Until next time, my friends, stay spooky, keep watching those horror films, and remember, there's nothing wrong with losing a little sleep over a good scare.
Creeping through the silence dark, whispers in the midnight park. The night is cold, there's no escape. Ghostly figures take their shape. Shadows play a twisted game. Fear and terror stake their claim. Footsteps follow close behind. Haunting thoughts invade your mind. Run away, but they won't go. In the darkness, fear will grow. Midnight shadows come to play. In your dreams, they'll always stay. Windows rattle, doors they creak. Ghostly whispers start to speak. Every corner hides a fear. Close your eyes, they're drawing near. Candles flicker, spirits call. In the night they'll take it all. Midnight strikes, the clocks rewind. Nightmares now are intertwined. They're away, but they won't go. In the darkness, fear will grow. Midnight shadows come to play. In your dreams, they'll